The wind screamed through the broken steel skeleton of the colony as Aina pulled her coat tighter around her shivering daughter, using her own body as a shield against the sharp snow blowing in through the shattered dome. Everything around them was broken, homes crushed, lights gone dark, and bodies lying still in the open square, slowly covered by thin layers of alien frost. The air was no longer safe to breathe, turning colder by the hour, filled with silent poison after the dome cracked. The power had failed when the Drazari bombs hit, knocking out heat, light, and life. They had come like a storm, without warning. Without a word. Their ships had appeared above the peaceful colony, released fire and death, then vanished without a second glance. They left nothing behind but silence and a graveyard. Aina had tried to run, tried to find shelter. But the crumbled buildings offered no real safety. Her fingers were frozen now, skin pale and stiff, as she clutched her daughter closer, wrapping what little warmth she had left around the girl. Her daughter had stopped crying hours ago. She didn't speak, didn't move. Only the faint rise and fall of her tiny chest told Aina she was still alive. Aina's mind was slow, dizzy from the cold, but still clear enough to understand that no help was coming. The last emergency signal had been sent, and the tower destroyed soon after. There had been no reply, no rescue. All nearby systems were quiet, and even if someone had heard, it was already too late. The Drazari made sure of that. They always struck isolated colonies first, far from help, to make sure no one could answer the cries. They believed humans were weak, and they wanted the galaxy to believe it too. Aina tried to sing softly, the melody broken and weak, an old lullaby her mother used to hum on long nights back on Earth. Her voice shook, but she kept going, hoping to give her child peace, even if she couldn't give her safety. Her lips were cracked and numb, her breath shallow, her eyes heavy. The cold had crept into her bones, slowing her heart. Her vision blurred and time stretched. Everything seemed quieter now, slower, almost peaceful. She held her daughter's face close to hers, feeling the cold skin, whispering, "I love you," again and again, afraid it might be the last thing she'd ever say. She thought of her husband, gone when the bomb hit their home. She thought of the warmth of their little kitchen, the smell of tea, the laughter of their child playing with a toy starship on the floor, all of it gone, lost in fire and frost. Now it was just the two of them, huddled in a corner of steel wreckage, waiting for the end. Aina closed her eyes, letting the dark take her gently. But just as her body began to give up, the sky tore open with a sound that shook the earth. A deep, thunderous roar echoed through the ruins, followed by a golden light that split the clouds overhead. It wasn't lightning, it was something else, something powerful. The wind shifted suddenly, no longer biting, now touched with warmth. Aina tried to lift her head but couldn't. Her body was too far gone. But she heard it, a low hum, steady and growing louder, like engines made of thunder. Then came footsteps. Heavy, sure, armored. A shadow moved through the smoke and snow. She barely opened her eyes and saw a figure walking toward her through the ruined street. Not an alien, human, tall and strong, his armor marked with the symbol of a red phoenix rising. He moved without fear, without hesitation. He knelt beside her, and she felt warmth for the first time in hours. Real heat. She coughed weakly, trying, to speak, but no words came. He looked down at her with steady brown eyes, his voice calm and warm. "You're safe now," he said. She tried to hold her daughter tighter, but her hands no longer moved. The man gently lifted the child from her arms and wrapped her in a thick blanket. Then he picked Aina up as well, carrying her like she weighed nothing. His body radiated heat through the armor, and she leaned into it, the sensation overwhelming. She thought she was dreaming, that this was her mind's final comfort before the end. But the man was real. He turned toward the glowing ship behind him, its engines humming softly in the sky above, a shape of steel and fire that didn't match any Earth vessel Aina had ever seen. It looked like a warship born from Earth's rage. As the world faded from her eyes, she managed a weak smile. The last thing she saw was her daughter's face resting peacefully, warm in the arms of the man who had come from nowhere, not as a soldier of an empire, but as a stranger who brought hope back to the frozen edge of the stars. Warmth wrapped around Aina like a blanket of life as she opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the soft yellow lights above her. For a long moment, she didn't move, unsure if she was still alive. She felt something soft beneath her, and the air smelled clean, recycled, and warm. She turned her head gently, her muscles aching, and saw her daughter lying beside her, safe, breathing easily under thick thermal covers. Aina felt tears sting her eyes as relief flooded her chest. Her hands trembled as she reached over to touch her child's face, feeling real warmth in the skin. Her daughter stirred, turned slightly, and continued sleeping peacefully. Aina laid her head back and closed her eyes, breathing deeply, letting her heart slow. The nightmare wasn't over, but for now they were alive. A gentle hiss from the door caught her attention. She turned her head again, more alert this time, as a man stepped into the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore black armor, marked with faded red lines across the chest. His face was strong, his expression calm. His short hair was dark, and his deep brown eyes looked like they carried the weight of many years and many battles. His voice, when he spoke, was steady and quiet. He introduced himself as Commander Dane. Aina tried to sit up, struggling against the ache in her limbs, but he gently raised a hand to stop her. "You don't need to move yet," he said. "You're safe aboard Vanguard Prime." Aina looked around the room again and realized she was inside a ship. The walls were sleek and silver, with smooth panels, quiet humming sounds, and soft blue lines running along the edges. She saw a screen showing a slow drift of stars outside. A spaceship, a real human warship. She stared at the man, her throat dry, voice hoarse, as she finally asked, "How did you find us?" He stepped closer, his tone calm but heavy. We picked up a fading distress signal, weak, scattered. We almost missed it, but something told me to check. By the time we reached your colony, it was too late to save most, but not too late to save you." Aina looked down, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Everyone else is gone." Dane didn't argue. He only nodded. The weight of the truth hung between them. She asked about her daughter, and he reassured her. The girl was fine, frostbitten, dehydrated, but no serious damage. The medical crew had acted quickly. Aina sat in silence, absorbing the impossible. Someone had come. Not just someone, a human fleet. She had believed all nearby military support had been destroyed or scattered. But this ship, this commander, had answered when no one else had. She asked him what ship this was, and Dane answered. Simply, the last hope Earth forgot, he explained more. Vanguard Prime was one of several warships that had survived the early purges of the Drazari War. After Earth lost contact with many outer colonies, the survivors had gone dark, hiding deep in the void, rebuilding in silence. The governments of Earth had crumbled, but not everyone surrendered. A new fleet was born, not under politics, but under purpose. They called themselves the Vanguard. Men and women from lost worlds, broken homes, and scattered stations, united by one mission: survive, strike back, and protect what little remained of humanity. They weren't many, but they were smart, fast, and fierce. The Drazari believed they had won, that humans were broken, scattered dust among the stars. But they were wrong. And now the Vanguard was done hiding. Aina listened, stunned. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of something greater. Dane invited her to the observation deck when she felt strong enough. He promised to answer more questions. Then he left her alone with her daughter. As the door closed, Aina lay back down, holding her child gently. Her thoughts raced. There was still fear inside her, still pain. But now something else had taken root, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She didn't know much about war or starships or tactics. She didn't know how many Drazari ships were out there. But she knew what she saw when she opened her eyes in the snow: a man who walked through fire and cold, who carried her and her daughter out of death, not for glory, not for politics, just because it was right. And now, lying in warmth she thought she'd never feel again, Aina began to understand something deeper. The Drazari had made a mistake. They had left survivors, and those survivors had found each other. In the frozen silence of a dying colony, a stranger had answered a fading call and brought with him not only fire, but purpose. She didn't know where they were headed next, but she knew this was no longer the end of her story. It was the beginning. Days passed like soft ripples through space, and Aina slowly regained her strength, though the weight in her heart remained. The ache of losing her home and friends never left her, but the hum of the ship around her, the steady rhythm of engines, and quiet voices reminded her she had survived. Her daughter smiled more now, playing with soft toys given by the crew, her laughter echoing down quiet metal corridors like sunlight breaking through clouds. Aina walked those corridors too, learning her way around the ship, offering to help where she could, finding comfort in motion. The Vanguard Prime was a machine built for war, yet there was warmth inside its heart. People with tired eyes and brave souls, patched uniforms, and quiet jokes. These weren't soldiers of some grand empire. They were survivors, fighters. Each face carried its own story, its own scar. Commander Dane was always busy, moving between decks, studying maps, and giving orders in calm tones that made people listen. Yet when he passed Aina, he always gave her a nod, a glance that said he hadn't forgotten why they were here. One evening, Aina stood beside him on the bridge, looking out through the thick glass at the stars. She saw ships blinking into formation outside, fast, deadly, and sharp-edged. Dane told her they were part of the Vanguard fleet, each one arriving silently from hidden zones across the sector. They had been in hiding for years, waiting, gathering, building piece by piece from wreckage and old tech. Now, they were coming together again. The reason wasn't just her colony's death. It was what the Drizari had planned next. Through intercepted signals and shattered data cores, the Vanguard had learned that the Drizari fuel network was preparing to launch a full expansion across human space. They thought humans were too broken to resist. The Vanguard disagreed. Dane pointed to a blinking red mark on the star map, a Drizari fuel station orbiting a gas giant deep in an unguarded system. "This is where we strike," he said, voice calm. "We don't just survive, we burn their fire." Aina stared at the point of light, her chest tightening. She had never seen a battle, never given an order, but something inside her burned now. It wasn't rage, not exactly. It was something heavier. A need to stand for those who couldn't anymore. She asked what he needed from her, and Dane didn't hesitate. "Eyes," he said. "You've seen their weapons, their patterns, what they hit. Help us think like them." And so she did. Aina spent hours in the strategy chamber, watching drone footage, reviewing bombing patterns, and listening to engineers debate shield types. She spoke about the way the Drizari attacked, how they moved before vanishing, how they always struck. Power grids first, then life support, then communications, a pattern of silence and suffering. Her memories, painful as they were, helped build the plan. Outside, the fleet continued to gather. Some ships were brand new, others carried scars from past battles. Each one bore the Phoenix emblem, the symbol of a flame that never died. There were fast corvettes, heavy cruisers, stealth frigates, and drone swarms waiting in cold silence. They moved like a single organism, silent and sharp, hiding in the dark until the right moment. That moment came quickly. The day of the attack, Aina stood on the bridge, watching as the stars bent and stretched, the jump drive humming beneath her feet. Dane stood at the center, one hand gripping the rail, eyes fixed forward. Around them, the crew moved with silent precision, every person knowing exactly what to do. Aina held her daughter close, heart pounding, not with fear, but with fire. The Vanguard Prime dropped out of hyperspace near the edge of the gas giant's rings, its dark hull blending with the shadow. One by one, the rest of the fleet arrived. Their engines cold, their lights dimmed. Ahead, the Drizari station floated like a dark crown, tall and jagged, with purple glowlights and energy cores pulsing steadily. It was guarded, but not heavily. The Drizari believed no human force would dare strike so deep. They believed wrong. Dane raised his voice, steady and clear. No survivors, no warning. "We hit them hard. We hit them fast. We take their fuel. And we light it ourselves." The command was given. And then the sky exploded. Human warships surged forward in perfect silence, then opened fire all at once. Rail cannons cracked, energy beams sliced through vacuum, and torpedoes roared like dragons in the dark. The Drizari defenses scrambled, caught off guard. Their shield lines flickered as Vanguard ships darted through like wolves. Aina stood frozen, watching every move on the screen. She saw human drones breach hulls and disable power stations. She saw captured AI units hack security towers. She saw fire where the enemy once stood strong. Dane never raised his voice, never wavered. He directed the battle like a conductor, calm and focused, even as alarms rang and enemy cruisers launched desperate counterattacks. The fight raged on for nearly an hour. Then it was done. The station burned. Its fuel lines erupted in a silent, golden flame that danced against the black of space. Drozari ships drifted, dead in orbit, and the Vanguard fleet stood tall. They left behind a signal, one the enemy couldn't ignore. A transmission, looping through open space, we remember. Aina watched the fire fade, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes wet but proud. For the first time in so long, she had seen power used for something right. Not for fear, not for destruction alone, but for justice. She didn't know where the next battle would be, but she knew she would be there, not just a survivor anymore, but a witness to something rising. Humanity wasn't finished. It had just begun to fight back. The stars burned with the heat of battle as the Vanguard fleet moved like fire through the dark. After the fall of the Drozari fuel station, the galaxy began to whisper again about humans, not as victims, but as warriors. News of the attack spread fast across systems that once believed Earth had been silenced forever. The Vanguard didn't stop. They moved quickly from one strike to the next, targeting enemy supply lines, outposts, and shipyards with precision and fury. Each mission was brutal, fast, and exact. There were no wasted movements, no speeches, just cold action and fierce revenge. Commander Dane stood at the heart of it all, always calm, always watching, his orders clear, and his presence like a mountain others could stand behind. Aina watched everything from the war room, learning faster than she thought possible. She began helping with pre-battle planning, using her memories and instincts to predict where the Drozari would move next. Her eyes became sharp, her mind stronger. She was no longer a refugee or just a mother. She was now a part of the mission. And through it all, her daughter stayed with her, growing steadier each day, understanding little by little that the people around them were fighting so that children like her would never freeze again. The ship became a strange kind of home, made of steel and fire, but filled with souls who carried light. The soldiers and crew no longer looked at Aina with pity. They respected her, trusted her. She worked beside them now, helping load supply. Drones, tracking energy waves, reading strange alien signals. One evening, as the fleet approached a key Drozari cum relay buried in an asteroid field, Aina stood at the viewing deck and watched the stars move around her. She thought about how far they had come from death in the snow to standing in the center of humanity's last fire. Dane joined her silently, both of them watching the black rock ahead. It wasn't just a relay. It was the Drozari's listening post, one that helped them monitor human signals across sectors. Destroying it would blind a large part of their control grid. The mission was dangerous. The asteroid field was full of hidden mines, drone patrols, and auto-defense turrets. It would require perfect timing, sharp flying, and courage from every pilot. But the Vanguard had done the impossible before. They gathered quietly in the briefing room, holograms glowing as Dane pointed to the weak spots. His voice never rose, never broke. He laid out the strategy simply: flank with stealth ships, disable the turrets, punch through the relay's outer shield with ion rounds, then send boarding teams in to overload the core. No mercy. No time for second chances. Aina stayed near the back, watching as young pilots nodded, some with fear in their eyes, but all with determination. These weren't machines, they were people, but each one carried something heavy in their hearts: pain, anger, memory. They had all lost someone. And they fought not just for revenge, but for a future no one had dared dream about in years. The battle started fast. Ships dove into the asteroid field, twisting through narrow gaps, avoiding hidden mines with seconds to spare. The enemy responded quickly, sending out interceptors and activating defense lines. The space lit up with streaks of energy fire and sudden bursts of light. Explosions shook the walls of Vanguard Prime, and Aina felt every blast in her chest. She stood in the command center with Dane, calling out shield updates, marking weak points, giving corrections. The training she had received had become instinct. Her hands moved fast, and her eyes missed nothing. The Vanguard ships struck with deadly rhythm. The stealth units took out outer turrets while the main cruisers blasted through the relay's outer shell. The Drazari fought hard, their weapons firing in tight patterns, their ships tough and strange in design. But they had never truly understood humans. They didn't know what it meant to fight for something more than orders. When the boarding teams landed, Aina held her breath. One of the shuttles lost power mid-dive, spiraling into the side of the asteroid, vanishing in a burst of orange flame. But 3 more made it through. The sounds from their radios were rough close-quarter combat, hand-to-hand struggles, shots echoing through tight corridors. Dane listened closely, sending in drone backup and mapping routes through the shifting interior. Then the signal came through. The relay was breached. The core was exposed. A small squad planted charges and set the overload countdown. 10 minutes. Enough to escape barely. As the fleet pulled back, Dane watched the timer flash on the screen. His fingers gripped the edge of the table. One of the boarding squads wasn't responding. They had been cut off deep inside. Aina stared at the signal. Her heart clenched. Dane's jaw tightened, but he gave the order no one wanted to hear. We can't go back. The ship rose through the asteroid belt, weaving through the chaos as the relay glowed brighter and brighter from its center. Then came a voice, faint, broken, but clear. One of the trapped soldiers had made it to an outer hatch. They were alive. Dane called for a shuttle, and against protocol, he piloted it himself, diving into the burning zone with nothing but fire and grit. Aina waited on the deck, her eyes locked on the scanner, praying. The seconds crawled by. Then the shuttle returned, battered, burned, but not empty. Dane carried the wounded soldier on his back, his own suit scorched. He said nothing, only nodded as he passed Aina. Moments later, the Drazari relay exploded behind them, torn apart by human fire. The blast lit the asteroid field like a second sun. As the fleet regrouped, cheers rose through the channels. One more enemy outpost gone. One more piece of darkness cleared. That night, Aina sat with her daughter in their quarters, staring at the stars outside. The child asked softly if the sky would ever be safe again. Aina didn't know, but she answered with truth, not yet. But it will be. We're making it that way. Because the Vanguard wasn't just destroying the enemy. They were lighting a path forward battle, star by star. The stars had grown quiet again, but only for a moment. Every Drazari station that burned sent fear racing across the enemy's networks. The once confident warlords began tightening defenses, calling reinforcements, doubling the patrols around. Their critical worlds, but it was too late. The vanguard had already found the heart of their enemy. Deep in an old sector once lost to human maps stood the Drazari core fortress, a massive structure floating in orbit around a dying red sun. It wasn't just a military base, it was their command center, shipyard, capital, and cultural pride. All in one. 3 moons circled it like dark guardians, armed with heavy cannons and defensive shields, backed by a fleet of thousands. It was said to be impossible to breach. The Drazari had ruled from there for centuries, their leaders sitting safe behind layer after layer of armor and arrogance. But the vanguard had reached the edge. They had burned fuel lines, crippled relay stations, cracked listening posts, and broken fear itself. Now they would strike at the heart. Commander Dane gathered the entire fleet near Quiet Star 2 jumps. Away, inside the war room, every captain stood silent, their faces pale but full of fire. Dane pointed to the star map, the red sun at its center glowing like a wound in space. He didn't shout. He didn't try to inspire. He simply said, "This is where it ends." Aina stood behind him, watching the room. She had grown into her role, now trusted by many, her mind sharp from weeks of planning, learning, and leading. The others listened when she spoke. They understood that she had once held a dying child in her arms while the sky burned, and now stood here, stronger, unbroken. She helped prepare the assault plan. The first strike would come from stealth bombers, timed with a solar flare from the dying sun to hide their movement. The moons would be hit at the same time, each one targeted by a full wing of assault ships. Once the shields cracked, the fleet would move in, using heavy cruisers and fast-cutting drones to slice open a path to the fortress. The final step would be a ground assault, human soldiers storming the core chambers to take control or destroy them. It was madness. The odds were brutal. The Drazari had numbers, size, history. But humans had something else, nothing left to lose. The fleet jumped into darkness, the stars blurring past the windows as the engines roared with silent fury. Aina stood on the bridge with Dane, her daughter safely held below in a secure chamber with medical staff and a few other families. It had been decided that she would stay close this time, not as a bystander, but as a voice beside the commander. The moment they dropped into the enemy system, the sky lit up with alerts. Thousands of ships, dozens of station cannons. Enemy. Drones poured from the moons like a swarm of shadows. But the vanguard didn't wait. Their bombers dove straight into the fire, cloaked by the storm of the sun, releasing wave after wave of explosive pods that shook the defense towers loose. Moons cracked. Shields shimmered. The enemy scrambled, shouting across open channels. In panic, human ships darted through the storm like sparks, cutting lines, disabling reactors, carving holes into the once impossible fortress. Aina could barely keep up with the reports, names of pilots, damage reports, ships lost, ships surviving, fires, victories. She listened, tracked, sent updates. Dane stood unmoved at the center of the chaos, giving his orders with steady clarity. One wing fell, another broke through. Then the main gate of the fortress cracked open with a thunderous shockwave, torn by focused rail cannon blasts and overloaded enemy shielding. The final charge began. Dropships raced into the hole, spilling human soldiers into the belly of the enemy's strongest bastion. Aina listened to their voices, calm, focused, and determined. Not a single one hesitated. They fought room by room, hall by hall, each step bringing them closer to the enemy's central command. Drozari leaders, once sure of their power, began to flee through escape routes. Some caught, some shot, others vanished. Aina tracked them all, sending coordinates to intercept teams. One voice caught her ear, an older soldier named Grant, leading a squad through a plasma-choked tunnel. His signal was weak, his breath heavy. He had found the reactor room. But he was surrounded. Dane listened. Then, without a word, he turned and headed to the launch bay. Aina followed him, fear gripping her chest. He was going in. She tried to stop him, saying he couldn't risk himself now, not when the fleet needed him, not when the battle wasn't over. But Dane looked at her, and for the first time, there was no command in his eyes, only truth. They followed. "Me here," he said, "and I won't let them fall alone." Aina said nothing more. She simply nodded. Dane entered his armor, stepped into his dropship, and flew down through the fire. The sky shook. The fortress groaned. Inside, Dane landed beside Grant's team, fought through the pressure tunnels, took a plasma hit to the side but kept moving, kept pushing until he reached the core. The charge was set. The team pulled out, but Dane stayed behind, buying time. He opened a channel back to the ship, voice rough but steady. "Tell the fleet, it's done." Aina heard him. Everyone heard him. The fortress glowed brighter and brighter until the sky erupted with a final light. Then silence. The core burned. The system fell. And 1,000 years of Drozari dominance ended not with a speech, but with one man's fire. The human fleet pulled back slowly, carrying wounded, carrying ghosts, but carrying something more powerful than ever before, a victory that would echo across the stars. The silence after the battle felt too loud. Aina stood on the deck of the Vanguard Prime, watching the dark sky where the enemy fortress had once floated like a black mountain. Now nothing remained but broken steel and drifting wreckage. The last pieces of a cruel empire turned to dust. The stars seemed to blink slower, quieter. The fire had ended, but no one spoke. The crew around her moved like shadows, their faces covered in sweat, smoke, and grief. They had won, but the cost hung heavy in the air. Commander Dane was gone. He had stayed behind in the burning core to finish what no one else could. He had walked into the heart of the enemy's strength, planted the final charge, and given everything to make sure they could never rise again. His final words still echoed in Anna's ears, steady and calm, like always. "Tell the fleet, it's done." She had sent the message across all channels. She had kept her voice strong while her hands trembled. And now, standing there, she stared into space and felt something crack quietly inside her chest. Her daughter held her hand, not saying a word. But her small grip reminded Aina of something Dane had once said, that they fought not only to win, but to make sure there was something left for the next generation. Around the fleet, ships carried wounded and broken warriors. Some wept, others prayed. Many simply stared out the windows, too tired to speak. The people who had followed Dane weren't soldiers trained in glory. They were miners, pilots, refugees, doctors, and farmers who had been forced to become warriors when everything else was taken. They had followed him because he never asked for praise. He gave direction, gave purpose, and stood between them and death more than once. Now there was no one to stand in that place. Yet even without him, they didn't fall apart. Aina stepped forward, her voice calm but firm, sending orders across the ships. Bring the survivors aboard. Begin repairs. Tend to the wounded. Bury the lost. The people listened. Not because she carried rank, but because she had walked with them through every fire since the first. The girl who had once frozen in a corner, holding her child, was now the woman standing at the center of the last human fleet. Dane's second-in-command came to her quietly and placed something in her hand, a scorched phoenix badge from Dane's armor, pulled from the wreckage. It was warm, as if it still carried the fire of his final act. Aina closed her fingers around it, not to hold on to grief, but to remember, to carry it forward. She went to the chamber where families and children had been kept safe during the final battle. Her daughter ran ahead, hugging one of the medics who had cared for her. The room was filled with quiet voices, soft music, and the scent of food. The war hadn't reached these walls, and Aina knew that was the true victory. The fleet returned to a quiet system near an old abandoned station once used by traders. There, the ships rested. Repairs began. Fuel was shared. Stories were told. Aina stood at the edge of a gathering, listening to a young pilot describe how Dane had once pulled his burning fighter into a shield gap just to save 3 others. Another soldier said Dane had given him half his rations once when they were lost in deep space for 3 days. Everyone had a memory, a story, a moment when the commander had made them feel like they mattered. And slowly the pain turned into pride. The galaxy began to change too. News of the final battle reached far systems. Colonies once thought abandoned lit up again, sending messages of support, offering to join the vanguard cause. Some Drazari factions surrendered. Others fled into deep space, afraid. No longer did they speak of humans as weak or broken. Now they spoke of fire, of the man who burned their fortress, of the fleet that rose from ice and silence and changed everything. Aina was invited to speak at the fleet's first council meeting, not as a guest, but as one of them. She stood in front of commanders, captains, survivors, and children, and she spoke in simple words. She told them about the day her colony froze, about the night she wrapped her child and waited to die, about the man who walked through the cold and lifted her from death, and about how every single one of them had become that man, had become that fire in their own way. She said they could not bring back what was lost, but they could protect what still remained. And more than that, they could build something new, something stronger, something free. When she finished, no one clapped, no one cheered. But every person stood in silence and placed a hand over their heart, just as Dane used to do before battle. That was all the answer she needed. Time passed. The vanguard grew. New ships were built, forged from the wreckage of old ones. Former enemies joined under truce, inspired by the courage of those who had no empire, no council, no home, only purpose. Aina remained with them, not as a leader in name, but as one in truth. She helped guide new missions, protected the weak, and taught others what Dane had taught her. That victory was not just survival, but kindness. That true strength was not in crushing others, but in lifting them. One evening, Long after the stars had quieted and the fleet was at peace, Aina sat with her daughter beneath a viewing dome. The girl had grown taller now, her eyes bright, her voice strong. She asked, "Do you think he knew he would die?" Aina thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, but he did it anyway, because he wanted us to live." Her daughter looked up at the stars, and her voice was soft. "Then I want to do something brave like that too." Aina smiled, her heart full of pride and sorrow and hope, all tangled together. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because the fire that had started in one man had spread to all of them and would burn on in every child who remembered. Humanity had not just survived the darkness, it had lit a path through it. And though the stars were still cold, they were no longer empty. They were filled with the warmth of those who chose to stand, even when everything else fell.